This video continues from the previous. Okay, so site considerations. We're in a neighborhood, we're looking at a piece of property, and we want to consider what the context is. The size, the value, and the design of the home should ideally be similar to those around it. And this has to do with a lot of things, especially with, as you know, if you put a very, very, very nice house in a neighborhood of rundown houses, you're going to lower the property value. If this does not matter to your client, it's ultimately their decision, but it is something to point out. It is something to note. They say you don't want to be the nicest house in the neighborhood simply because you won't get what its value is out of it when you sell it. That's not important to everyone, but it is something that is a consideration. It is something that we need to note in our site analysis, and that's why. Review boards. You want to do the research to find out if there is a review board or some sort of a commission that sets minimum standards for homes built in a particular area. There are certain towns where you can only build with brick. Now, it usually generally applies to commercial, but nonetheless, you could have those kinds of guidelines. I did a project some time ago. It's a very long time ago, in Alpharetta. And because it was in the historic district, they had very, very clear guidelines of what you could and could not build and what you had to do and what you had to use. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun trying to meet those criteria. Because sometimes when you restrict what you're allowed to do, it actually makes you more creative. Because there was a building that they wanted to bring in or put in there that was large. And the review board said, okay, well, it has to be brick and it has to not look like it's a large building. You have to break it up so that it looks like a bunch of small little buildings. And that was so much fun trying to figure out how to do that. And commercial had to look residential. So that was also another factor. So how do you make something large work based on all this? They had these very stringent details on, you know, what we talked about when we got to looking at houses that had intricate detail, and we called it gingerbread. So, you know, how are you going to put gingerbread on this large box and make it not lose its scale? And so it's really, really, really challenging. So it was kind of fun. Access. A home requiring universal access, and in my opinion, they should all require it. There are guidelines for new home construction, and they are different right now from guidelines for homes that are renovation. But as much as possible, you want to design for universal access. You never know what might happen to your client that they need this. And it's easier if you can blend this in initially than to do it later. Because I know you all have driven around and seen houses that were later retrofit with these massive ramps on the outside of the house that did not look like they belonged. They look like an afterthought. So if you can design universally to begin with, then later down the road, you won't have to do things like that. Every structure should be designed as an integral part of the site as much as possible. And I keep coming back to falling water, of course, because, I mean, how do you design any more integrally than that? I mean, that's one of the most well-integrated sites. The building should function and appear as part of the landscape. Now, again, this is a guideline. You may have a client that wants the exact opposite, and it's their building, so your decision will be how to do that well. So maybe they want the building to, or their residence to be something that looks like it landed and somebody landed a building on the site, and they may want that, and that's, you know, you can still do that well. But as much as possible for sustainable design, integration is important. So building sites are sold and registered as lots, and lots can be divided into private, public, and service. And obviously we're mostly dealing with private because we're dealing with private residences. And so there are certain things you want to be able to access the site, and things you want to be careful with where you put bushes, because some bushes can get really, really big and make it very difficult when you're driving out the driveway to see. They just chopped down a whole bunch of, it was heartbreaking. They chopped down these beautiful old cherry trees because they were probably 70 years old. They were beautiful, but because there were so many accidents at this intersection, because the trees blocked on the road curved, and the trees were on the road and went with the curve, but they grew out and over the road, and they were low because they were cherry trees. So they completely blocked the view, and there were multiple accidents. And I think one may have been like severe injury. And they did property damage and everything. And after that, they came in and they cut them down. So just don't plant them there in the first place. You know, you see these trees that have their tops cut off or the sides of them cut off so that they you know, as they've grown, they become not ideal, and people will cut them in weird ways so that they don't do things to the site. So choose, when you do any landscaping, if you don't bring in a landscape architect, do your homework, do your research, make sure you understand that, you know, there are, for instance, crepe myrtles are low growing, but some of them are not. And I have a crepe myrtle I planted a few years ago from seeds. I went and I got a bunch of seed pods at there were these trees, and they're large, and I knew they were large, and the area I could plant them in was allowed for it. So I went and got a bunch of seed pods, and I just broadcast them all over this one area in my yard, and they grew from the seed pods. And after just a couple of years, they're probably already close to 30 feet. And that's, you know, they'll get 40 feet. And I wanted that because I wanted that. That's what I wanted, because I wanted that part of that yard to be shading the driveway. But you have to think about those things. So make sure you do your research before you plant a tree or a bush. Somebody planted what they thought were bushes right next to my house, and they're not. They're trees. My neighbor has exactly one like it, and it's probably 40 feet tall. So I'm constantly having to cut this thing down. I'm going to have it removed. I mean, I hate to do that, but better just to plan for it in the first place. You also have to be careful. The garage cannot be closer to the street than the property line in most municipalities. And you don't want it to be, because it blocks views. Also, it's not very attractive. Okay, here's an example. You see this floor plan? It's this one. And so here's the car, and the car pulls up. You can't see the front door from the car. And that's just partly a safety issue, right? So you have this poor visibility from here to here. So if you're standing here and somebody pulls in your driveway, the garage is blocking you from seeing from your front yard who's pulled into your driveway. And this one just says, well, shift this part of the building forward. This one's flipped. So we flip it and we shift this part of the building forward, and now we can see who's pulled into our driveway. But also, you know, the main feature of your house here is the garage based on this design. So things we need to consider, including the climate. What is the average temperature? Knowing this will help us understand some things we may want to do with how we place our house on our site. How much rain do we get? That has to do with calculating, one of the things it has to do with is calculating rain load so that you can design gutters and downspouts to make sure that, and roof pitch. If you're somewhere like Seattle, a flat roof could become problematic. One of the problems I have is that the gutters on my house aren't big enough. And so if I get a really, really heavy rain, the rain spills over the gutters. And, you know, the way to fix that is just to get bigger ones. What is the humidity? Is this something you're going to have to consider? I just realized I didn't have a title for that. Snowfall. Why is this important? Well, if it snows a lot, flat roofs are going to be a problem. Roof pitch is going to matter. Sunshine. As we talked a little bit about, the solar orientation is very critical to your design. In fact, let me stop here because we're going to talk about this a little more intensively. Let me stop here and we'll continue in the next video.